Kneel. She grabbed him by the shoulder, hard enough that he stumbled, and shoved a 10-year-old boy down onto his knees in the aisle of a packed commercial aircraft. Not a criminal, not a threat, a child in a rocket ship hoodie who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Megan Carter stood over Marcus Williams, her hand still gripping his small shoulder, and smiled. Around her, 40 passengers sat frozen in disbelief. His mother screamed his name, and nobody moved. Nobody stopped it. But in 15 minutes, one woman would make a single phone call, and $15 billion would vanish from this airline before the wheels ever touched the ground. Before this flight landed, $15 billion would be frozen, and nothing would ever be the same. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning of October 14th started the way most good days do, quietly, without any warning of what was coming. Michelle Williams had been planning this trip for almost 8 months. 8 months of overtime shifts at the hospital where she worked as a charge nurse. 8 months of saying no to small luxuries. 8 months of keeping a secret from her son Marcus because she wanted the look on his face when she finally told him to be real and unscripted. And on the morning they were supposed to leave for Los Angeles, when she sat him down at the kitchen table in their apartment in the Bronx and slid the printed boarding passes across the table, Marcus Williams, 10 years old, gap-toothed, wearing a hoodie with a rocket ship on it, looked at those papers like they were tickets to another planet. "We're really going?" he said. "We're really going," Michelle told him. He didn't yell. He didn't jump up and down the way she expected. He just looked at her with those big brown eyes and said, very quietly, "Mom, you kept this secret for how long?" "Long enough," she said. He stood up slowly, walked around the table, and hugged her so hard she had to catch the edge of the counter to stay upright. And Michelle Williams, who had held herself together through a divorce, through a global pandemic, through every night shift that bled into morning, pressed her lips together and breathed. She had done something good. She had made her son feel like the world still had beautiful things in it. They took the A train to the airport. Marcus wore his backpack with the space patches on it, the one he'd saved up allowance money to buy at a science museum trip 2 years ago. He kept the boarding passes in his front zipper pocket like they were passports to somewhere extraordinary. On the train, he talked nonstop about the Pacific Ocean, about whether California really looked the way it did in movies, about whether he'd be able to see a palm tree up close. Michelle listened to every word. She answered every question. She let him have all of it. At the airport, they moved through security without incident. Marcus was polite to every TSA officer, said thank you when they handed him his backpack, waited for his mother without being asked. Michelle noticed the way he carried himself, shoulders back, eyes forward, careful. She had taught him that. She had taught him how to move through the world in a way that left no room for misunderstanding, because she understood, the way every Black mother understands, that the margin for error was thinner for him than it was for other children his age. She hated that she'd had to teach him that, but she had. Flight 2247 from John F. Kennedy International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport was scheduled to depart at 9:40 in the morning. It was a full flight, every seat taken, the kind of load the airline loved and passengers tolerated. Business class up front, economy stretching back through a long tube of recycled air and muted blue upholstery. Michelle had splurged on seats in the 4th row of the economy cabin, close enough to the front to feel like a small victory. Window and middle. Marcus took the window without being asked, and Michelle didn't say a word about it. He pressed his face to the glass before they even pushed back from the gate. "You can't really see anything yet," Michelle told him. "I know," he said, "but I want to see the moment it changes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her book. The flight took off on time, which was already unusual enough to feel like a good omen. Marcus watched the city fall away beneath them with an expression of such pure concentration that the older woman sitting in the aisle seat across from them leaned over and smiled at him. "First time flying?" she asked. "Second time," Marcus said without turning from the window. "But the first time I was 4, so I don't think it counts." The woman laughed. Her name was Beverly. She would become important later, in ways no one on that plane could have anticipated. For the first hour of the flight, everything was ordinary. The seatbelt sign went off, the beverage cart moved through the cabin with its familiar metallic rattle. Passengers settled into the specific kind of resigned peace that long flights produce. Headphones in, blankets up, screens glowing. Marcus had his tablet out and was watching a documentary about the Mars rover. He'd seen it 3 times already, but he watched it the way some kids watch their favorite movie, finding something new each time. Michelle dozed. She was half asleep when she heard the voice. It wasn't loud. That was the thing she would keep coming back to later, when she tried to reconstruct the sequence of events in her own mind. The voice wasn't loud. It was controlled, deliberately controlled, in the way that people who want to embarrass someone without technically raising their voice have learned to be controlled. "Excuse me." Michelle opened her eyes. Standing in the aisle beside their row was a flight attendant. Her name tag read Megan. She was white, somewhere in her late 30s, with her hair pulled back in a tight knot. She was looking at Marcus, not at Michelle, at Marcus. And her expression was not the expression of someone who was concerned or confused. It was the expression of someone who had already decided something. "Is there a problem?" Michelle asked. Megan did not look at Michelle. She kept her gaze on Marcus. "I need to speak with him," she said. Marcus had taken his headphones off and was watching the flight attendant with the careful, calibrated stillness that Michelle recognized as the thing she had taught him, the thing that broke her heart every time she saw it, that particular brand of black child composure that is actually vigilance wearing a neutral face. "You can speak with me," Michelle said. Her voice was even. "I'm his mother." Now Megan looked at her. Just briefly. "Ma'am, I'm addressing a situation with the passenger in 14A. He's 10 years old," Michelle said. "I'm his mother. Whatever you need to say to him, you say to me." Something shifted in Megan's face. It was subtle, the kind of shift you could miss if you weren't watching carefully. A slight tightening around the mouth, a fraction of a degree in the angle of her chin. "There's been a complaint," she said, "about this seat, about whether it was properly ticketed." Michelle blinked. "I have the tickets right here. I bought them 8 months ago." "I'm going to need to verify the seating assignment." "Then verify it. I'll show you the confirmation number." "Ma'am, my name is Michelle Williams, and I am asking you, politely, what the problem is." Marcus had not moved. He was still watching the flight attendant. His hands were flat on his knees. Megan reached past Michelle, past her personal space without asking, and pointed at Marcus. "There was a complaint from another passenger that this child was in a seat that had been double booked. I need him to step out of the seat until we can verify." "Step out," Michelle said. "Step out to where? We're on an airplane." "Into the aisle," Megan said, "while I check the system." "That's not—" Michelle stopped, breathed. "That is not how this works. I have documentation. Right here. I'll pull it up right now." She reached into her bag for her phone, and while she was doing that, while her eyes were down, Megan turned to Marcus and said it. "You, step out into the aisle and wait there." Marcus looked at his mother. Michelle's head came up fast. "He is not going anywhere," Michelle said. "It's protocol. It is not protocol to make a child stand in the aisle of a commercial aircraft. I have been on many flights in my life, and that is not protocol. Now I am asking you one more time, clearly and calmly, what is the actual issue here?" Megan's jaw tightened. "If you continue to be uncooperative, I will have to involve the senior flight attendant." "Please," Michelle said, "involve whoever you need to involve. And while you're at it, find me the gate agent's number because I am going to report this conversation." Something happened then that nobody in the immediate area expected. Megan leaned down, physically leaned down, dropping her face to the level of the armrests, and looked directly at Marcus. Not at Michelle, at Marcus. And she said in a voice that was low enough to be almost private, but not quite, "Young man, I need you to kneel in the aisle, right now, so I can see your boarding pass in better lighting." The cabin went quiet. Not all at once. Row by row, like a wave traveling backward through the plane, conversation stopped. People turned, because what they had just heard, what they thought they had just heard, didn't make sense. An adult, in a uniform, on an airplane, telling a child to kneel. Marcus Williams looked at the flight attendant for a long moment. Then he looked at his mother. Michelle's face had gone very still, the way faces go still when a person is using every single resource they have just to stay in their body and not let the emotion take over completely. "Baby," Michelle said, and her voice cracked on the word, just slightly. "You don't have to do anything." "Ma'am, I need you not to interfere with, I am his mother." Michelle's voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper, and somehow more powerful for it. "Do not tell me not to interfere." But Marcus had already moved. Slowly, with a dignity that made several grown adults in the surrounding rows hold their breath, Marcus Williams climbed out of seat 14A and stood in the aisle. He was small for his age. He was wearing a rocket ship hoodie. He looked at Megan Carter and said, very quietly, "What do you need me to do, ma'am?" The word ma'am. A 10-year-old child calling the person who had humiliated him, ma'am. The woman in seat 15C, a retired school teacher named Gloria Hastings, pressed her hand over her mouth. "Kneel," Megan said, "right here, so I can check." "No." Michelle was on her feet. She was not loud. She was something far more devastating than loud. "No, my son is not kneeling on an airplane for a boarding pass check. You want to see our tickets? I will show you our tickets right now, but my son is not getting on his knees for you or anyone else on this flight." Megan straightened. "If you don't comply..." "Comply with what?" The voice came from across the aisle. It was a man, maybe 60, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His name was Robert Ashford, and he had worked 30 years in corporate law before retiring to Arizona. "Comply with what exactly? What is the stated protocol here that requires a child to kneel in the aisle of an aircraft? I'd like to hear that, out loud." Megan turned toward him. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. I'm a passenger on this flight," Robert said. "Everything that happens in this cabin concerns me." 3 rows back, a phone came up. Then another one. Beverly, the woman with the warm smile who had spoken to Marcus before takeoff, had her phone out and held it in a way that wasn't obvious, but wasn't hidden either. She had pressed record the moment she heard the word kneel. Michelle reached out and took Marcus's hand. He let her. He pressed close to her side, and she felt how tense his small body was. That terrible, practiced stillness that was not peace, was never peace, was just the performance of it. "I need you both to sit down," Megan said, "or I will call the senior flight attendant and we will have a much longer conversation." "Call them," Michelle said. "Please, call them right now. I want a senior flight attendant. I want the pilot if you can get them. I want whoever is in charge of this aircraft." Megan pulled her radio from her hip. And that was when something shifted in the cabin. Not loudly, not all at once, but the way that tide shifts, inexorably, and then completely. People who had been looking at their screens were no longer looking at their screens. People who had been pretending not to listen were no longer pretending. And in the 5th row from the front, in a window seat on the opposite side of the aircraft, a woman named Clarissa Green closed the spreadsheet she had been reviewing on her laptop and turned slowly to look toward the commotion in the aisle. Clarissa Green was 57 years old. She had built 3 companies from the ground up, survived 2 recessions, and 1 near-catastrophic corporate lawsuit. And she had learned to read a room the way most people read a page, quickly, completely, without missing anything. What she was reading right now sent a cold current through her that she hadn't felt in a very long time. She had invested in this airline. $15 billion of her personal portfolio was tied to it. She had fought to get a seat on the advisory board specifically because she believed the company had the capacity to be something different, something better, in an industry that desperately needed both. She watched Megan Carter with the phone held to her mouth. She watched Marcus Williams standing in the aisle with his shoulders back and his chin up, his small hand wrapped around his mother's, trying so hard not to show how frightened he was. And Clarissa Green made a decision. She reached into her bag and pulled out her own phone, not to record, not to post. She opened a contact and typed a message to a name that very few people on that airplane would have recognized, but every financial journalist in the country would have. She typed 4 words: freeze the operating accounts. Then she put her phone face down on her tray table and watched what happened next. The senior flight attendant's name was Diana Walsh. She appeared from the front of the cabin with the brisk purposefulness of someone who had been doing this job for 19 years and had seen most of what air travel had to offer. She was compact and efficient, and her expression, as she moved toward the disruption in row 14, was professionally neutral. "What's the situation?" she said quietly to Megan. "Passenger in 14A has a ticketing dispute," Megan said. 14A has a ticketing dispute, Megan said. "They're being uncooperative." Diana looked at Michelle. She looked at Marcus. Her eyes moved to the phones that were still recording, and something in her expression shifted. The tiniest recalculation, almost imperceptible. "Ma'am," she said to Michelle, "I apologize for any inconvenience. Can I see your boarding documentation?" Michelle had it up on her phone before the sentence was finished. She held the screen out. Diana looked at it. She scrolled with one finger. She looked again. Then she looked at Megan, and the look she gave Megan Carter was not the look of a colleague who had come to back her up. It was the look of someone who had just understood, in a single illuminated moment, exactly what kind of situation she had walked into. "The seat assignment is valid," Diana said. Megan's jaw shifted. "There was a complaint from the seat assignment is valid," Diana said again, carefully, slowly, like each word was a step across thin ice. She turned back to Michelle. "I'm so sorry for the disruption. Please, both of you, sit down and enjoy your flight. Is there anything I can get you?" Michelle looked at her, really looked at her. "An explanation," she said. "I understand," Diana said, "and why did she ask my son to kneel?" Silence. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of a full one. 47 passengers in the surrounding rows, not one of them breathing quite normally. The hum of the engines, the faint rattle of the beverage cart somewhere distant. And Diana Walsh, standing in the aisle, looking at Michelle Williams, with an answer she didn't have, and a situation she hadn't created, and a weight that wasn't hers, but that she was nonetheless going to be standing under for a very long time. "I'm going to look into that," Diana said. "Yes," Michelle said. "You are." She sat down. Marcus sat beside her. He put his headphones back in, but he didn't press play. He just sat there with his hands in his lap and looked out the window at the clouds. Michelle reached over and covered his hand with hers. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. There was nothing that could unsay what had happened. And she had learned, the way most Black mothers learn, through years of accumulating moments exactly like this one, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your child is simply to be next to them in the silence. Marcus turned from the window and looked at her. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. "No," Michelle said, "you didn't. So why did she—" "I don't know, baby." He nodded, slow, like he was filing something away somewhere inside himself, the way children do when they encounter a piece of the world that doesn't make sense, and they've learned that asking for an explanation won't necessarily produce one. "Okay," he said. He turned back to the window, and 3 rows back, Beverly pressed stop on her recording, looked down at the screen for a long moment, and then, slowly, deliberately, with the particular kind of resolve that comes from being 72 years old and no longer willing to let things pass without consequence, she opened her social media app and began to type. She didn't write a long caption. She didn't editorialize. She simply wrote, "This just happened on my flight. This child's name is Marcus. He is 10 years old. Watch what they made him do." Then she pressed share. And the world began to catch fire. Within 4 minutes, the video had been viewed 11,000 times. Within 7 minutes, 30,000. In the galley at the front of the aircraft, Diana Walsh was having a conversation with Megan Carter that was not going the way Megan had expected. It was not the conversation of a supervisor protecting a subordinate. It was the conversation of someone who had seen the phones and understood with sharp, terrible clarity that the clock was already running. "What were you thinking?" Diana's voice was low, controlled, almost airless. "There was a complaint," Megan said. "Passenger in 16B said the kid had been kicking the seat, and there was a question about the ticketing. Did you check the ticketing system?" A pause. I was going to. Did you ask him to kneel? Megan's chin came up. I asked him to step out so I could. Did you use the word kneel? The silence that followed was not ambiguous. Diana pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. Megan, there are at least 10 phones recording this right now. She stopped. Go to the rear galley. Don't speak to any passengers. Don't speak to the media if they call. Don't post anything. Go to the back and wait. I was just doing my... Megan. Diana's voice was very quiet and very final. Please, go. Megan went. Diana stood alone in the galley for a moment, looking at the small round window in the service door. Below them, invisible through cloud cover, America was going about its morning. People were having breakfast. Kids were at school. No one out there knew yet that something was unfolding in the economy cabin of a flight at 37,000 feet. Something small and terrible and very, very old that was about to become the only thing any of them were talking about. She reached for the intercom to contact the captain. At the same moment, in seat 5A, Clarissa Green received a reply to her 4-word message. It read, "Done. What do you want to do next?" Clarissa looked out her window. She thought about Marcus Williams standing in that aisle with his shoulders back and his chin up. She thought about the word kneel. She thought about how much a word could cost and who usually paid the price and who usually didn't. She began to type her response, and the flight had 1 hour and 47 minutes left until landing. Beverly's thumb was still hovering over the screen when the first notification came back. Not a like, not a retweet. A direct message from someone she had never heard of, a journalist in Chicago, that read, "Is this real? When did this happen? Can I use this?" She stared at the message for a full 3 seconds. Then another one came. Then 5 more. Then the number stopped being something she could count individually and became just a number that kept climbing, the way a fever climbs, faster than reason can track. 11 minutes had passed since the flight attendant had put her hands on Marcus Williams. Beverly was not a woman who panicked. She was 72 years old. She had buried a husband and raised 4 children and survived a breast cancer diagnosis at 64. And she had learned that panic was a luxury that cost more than it was worth. But her hands were not entirely steady when she forwarded the video to 2 numbers she had in her phone: her granddaughter in Atlanta, who worked in digital media, and a producer at a news station in New York she had met at a church function 3 years ago and never expected to need. She wrote the same message to both of them. 3 words: "This needs attention." Then she tucked her phone into her lap and looked toward the front of the cabin. Marcus was in his seat. His head was turned toward the window. His mother had her arm around him, not the casual arm of a parent on a normal flight, but the arm of someone who was holding something precious and breakable, and fully aware of that fact. Michelle Williams was not looking out the window. She was staring straight ahead with an expression that Beverly recognized from the faces of women who are doing the most difficult thing a person can do, which is to feel everything and show nothing, because showing everything would cost too much right now, and there was a child watching. Beverly looked away. She didn't want Michelle to feel observed. She already had enough of that. 7 rows behind Beverly, a man named Tyler Chen, 26 years old, freelance videographer from Brooklyn, had captured the entire exchange on his phone, in portrait mode, with remarkable steadiness. He had not posted it yet. He was watching it back on his screen, earbuds in, going through it frame by frame, with the trained eye of someone who understood that what he was looking at was not just a moment. It was a document. He watched Megan Carter's hand on Marcus's shoulder. He watched Marcus go down to his knees. He watched the boy's face, that particular expression of a child who is confused and humiliated and trying with everything he has not to cry. And Tyler Chen, who had filmed protests and funerals and press conferences and natural disasters, had to press his lips together and breathe through his nose for a moment before he could continue. He opened his Upload app. He typed a caption that took him less than 30 seconds because he had spent his career learning that the most powerful captions are the ones that don't tell the audience how to feel. Flight attendant forces black child to kneel in airplane aisle over a ticketing dispute. Child's name is Marcus. He is 10 years old. This happened 8 minutes ago. We are still in the air. He pressed post. 12 minutes since it began. The video went up on Tyler's account, which had 47,000 followers, at 11:03 in the morning. By 11:06, it had been shared 900 times. By 11:09, the share counter had broken 4,000, and the number was moving so fast it no longer looked like a number. It looked like a malfunction. In the rear galley, Megan Carter was sitting on a jump seat with her arms folded and her jaw tight. She had her own phone out, and she had seen it. She had seen Tyler's video. She had seen Beverly's. She had seen the hashtag that had already begun forming around both of them, the way debris forms around a wound. She had seen her own face, frozen in a video thumbnail, with an expression that she herself, looking at it now, could not entirely defend. Her hands were cold. She opened her messages and started typing to her sister. She got 3 sentences in before she deleted all of it and put the phone face down on her knee. Her sister would see the videos anyway. Everyone was going to see the videos. She understood that now with the specific, nauseating clarity of someone who has just realized that the moment they thought was private was never private at all. She thought about what Diana had said. Go to the back and wait. She had spent 19 years on this airline without a single major complaint. 19 years of early mornings and delayed flights and passengers who treated her like furniture, and turbulence over the Atlantic, and everything else that came with the job. And she had done it with a record that her supervisor had called, at her last review, exemplary. 19 years. And all of it was now being compressed and filtered through 12 seconds of video that showed her hand on a child's shoulder and a word coming out of her mouth. Kneel. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs. In the cockpit, Captain James Okafor had just received the call from Diana Walsh. He listened without interrupting. He was a careful man by nature and by training, and he listened to all of it before he said anything. When Diana finished, there was a silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. How many phones, he asked. At least 10 that I counted, Diana said. Another silence. Is the child okay? He's in his seat. He seems, I don't know, quiet. And the mother? Controlled, Diana said. Very controlled, which, honestly, is what worries me. Okafor understood what she meant. He had spent enough of his life being a black man in a uniform to understand the specific weight of controlled composure and what it contained. All right, he said, keep it calm. Don't let anyone else approach that row. And tell Megan to stay in the rear until we land. Already done. Good. He paused. We're 2 hours from LAX. Let's get these people on the ground. 14 minutes since it began. The hashtag was born at 11:05 Eastern Time in a tweet from a 20-year-old college student in Memphis who had seen Beverly's video and typed 3 words with the fire of someone who had spent her entire life watching moments like this one slip by without consequence. Justice for Marcus. No spaces, just the name and the demand, compressed into a single word like a fist. By 11:11, it was the number 3 trending topic on the platform. By 11:14, it was number 1. Michelle Williams knew none of this. She was at 37,000 feet with her arm around her son and no internet beyond the thin, expensive onboard Wi-Fi she hadn't purchased. And she was using the only resource available to her, which was her own steadiness to hold Marcus together. She was also, underneath the steadiness, as angry as she had ever been in her adult life. Not the hot anger that burns itself out quickly, the cold, deep anger that settles in the bones and stays there, that becomes something structural over time, that is less a feeling and more a decision. She was not going to let this be nothing. She did not know yet that the world had already made the same decision without being asked. Marcus had finally pressed play on his documentary. He was watching the Mars rover move across the red surface of another planet, slow and patient and unstoppable. And Michelle watched his profile in the dim cabin light and made herself memorize it. This face, right now, The way he looked before he fully understood what had happened to him, before it settled into something permanent, before it became a story he would have to tell for the rest of his life. She wanted to remember him as he was in this exact moment. Before. 15 minutes since it began. The call that changed everything came to Clarissa Green's personal phone at 11:15 in the morning. It was from her chief financial officer, a man named Daniel Park, who had worked with her for 11 years and who understood, with 11 years of hard evidence, that when Clarissa did something, it was because she had already thought through every consequence and made her peace with all of them. "It's done," Daniel said. "The operating accounts are frozen. I've also placed a hold on the discretionary fund and the capital reserves per your secondary message. Do you want me to contact the board?" "Not yet," Clarissa said. "Clarissa," his voice was careful, "this is going to move markets." "I know. When the bell opens tomorrow, Daniel," she said his name the way she said everything, without aggression and without room for reinterpretation. "I know exactly what this is going to do. I've known for 20 years what money can and cannot fix. Right now, I need you to hold those accounts and let me know the moment anyone from the airline's executive team tries to access them." A pause. "And then what?" "Then you call me," she said, "and I'll tell you what to say." She ended the call. Across the aisle and 4 rows back, a retired school teacher named Gloria Hastings was on the airplane's paid Wi-Fi, which she had purchased because she was flying to see her daughter for the first time in 8 months and wanted to send photos the moment she landed. She was not sending photos right now. She was looking at the number next to the hashtag Justice for Marcus and feeling something she hadn't felt since she'd stood on the steps of her state capitol building in 1989 and watched a crowd of thousands move toward something that felt, for one luminous afternoon, like justice. She leaned across the aisle. "Beverly," she whispered. "Beverly, look at this." Beverly took the phone. Her eyes moved across the screen. The number. The hashtag. The videos, her video, Tyler's video, and at least 3 others she hadn't known existed, captured from angles she hadn't seen, telling the same story from different directions. She handed the phone back without a word. She turned to look at the back of Marcus's seat, just visible above the headrest, 2 rows ahead of her. "Baby boy," she said quietly, to no one but herself, "you have no idea what's happening right now." 18 minutes since it began. The airline's communications director, a woman named Sandra Pelletier, was in the middle of a quarterly review meeting in a glass-walled conference room in the company's Manhattan offices when her assistant opened the door without knocking. That alone told her everything she needed to know about the severity of what was coming. Her assistant, whose name was Kevin, and who had been doing this job for 3 years, had never in that time opened a door without knocking. "We have a situation," Kevin said. Sandra looked at the expression on his face. She closed her laptop. "How bad?" He held up his phone. She read the trending hashtag. She saw the view count on the primary video. She watched 6 seconds of it, enough to see Megan Carter's hand on a child's shoulder and the word that came out of her mouth. Sandra Pelletier had been in crisis communications for 16 years. She had managed data breaches, mechanical failures, 3 separate PR catastrophes involving executives who should have known better, and 1 incident involving a gate agent and a viral microphone situation that she still woke up thinking about on bad nights. She ranked them, privately and professionally, on a scale of 1 to 10. She looked at Kevin. "Get me the CEO, get me legal, and get me someone on that plane." She was already standing up. "What's our timeline?" Kevin asked. "We don't have one," Sandra said. The timeline already happened. 22 minutes since it began. The CEO of the airline was named Richard Hayward. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had spent 40 years in the aviation industry, accumulating a particular kind of confidence that comes from having navigated enough crises to believe that crises, ultimately, could always be managed. He was eating lunch at his desk when Sandra appeared in his doorway, and he understood from the expression on her face that this was not a manageable situation in the conventional sense. She put her tablet on his desk and played the video. He watched it. He watched it a second time. He set the tablet down with the very deliberate slowness of a man who is keeping himself from reacting physically. Where is the plane now? Somewhere over Missouri, Sandra said. LAX is the destination. Lands in about 90 minutes. And the accounts? He was looking at an alert that had appeared on his own computer, a notification from the financial system that he had never seen in this particular configuration before. A hold, across multiple accounts simultaneously. He looked at the name attached to the authorization. He looked at it for a long moment. Clarissa Green. Yes, Sandra said, she's on that flight. It was not a question. Yes, Sandra said again. Phone. She's at altitude. Then get me phone. She's at altitude. Then get me the satellite line. Get me whoever handles her accounts. Get me... He stopped. He put his hands flat on the desk. He was doing the calculation that executives do in moments of genuine crisis, the rapid and unsentimental arithmetic of consequences. The video, the hashtag, the frozen accounts. Clarissa Green, sitting on his airplane 5 miles above the earth, having already made moves that would hit the opening bell tomorrow like a detonation. Who else knows about the accounts? Daniel Park sent a notification to 3 financial reporters 20 minutes ago, Sandra said quietly. I think that was intentional. Hayward looked at her. She wanted us to know she wasn't hiding it, Sandra said. He stood up. 27 minutes since it began. Marcus Williams had fallen asleep. It happened the way children fall asleep, without ceremony, without transition, just there, and then not there, consciousness folding itself away like something that had decided the waking world had asked enough of it for now. His head had drifted toward his mother's shoulder, and Michelle had adjusted herself without waking him, slow and careful. And now he was asleep against her, with the documentary still playing silently on his tablet, the Mars rover still moving across that red landscape, patient and unstoppable. Michelle looked at his face while he slept. She thought about the moment this morning when he had hugged her at the kitchen table. She thought about the word kneel and the hand on her son's shoulder, and the way he had gone down because he had been taught to be careful, because she had taught him to be careful, because the world had made it necessary to teach him that. And she felt the full weight of all of it land on her at once. The anger and the love and the grief and the specific, particular helplessness of having done everything right and still arriving here. She did not cry. She had decided before the plane took off that she was not going to spend this trip crying. She was going to get her son to California, and she was going to get answers, and she was going to make sure that what had happened in this cabin did not simply dissolve into the recycled air and disappear. Her phone had no internet. She didn't know yet. She didn't know about the hashtag, or the videos, or the 47 different news alerts that had gone out in the last half hour, or the fact that the name Marcus Williams was now known to somewhere north of 2 million people and climbing. She sat in the quiet and held her sleeping son, and did not know that the world was already rearranging itself around him. 31 minutes since it began. In the rear galley, Megan Carter's phone had died. The battery had been low when she boarded, and the hours of being on had finished it off. She did not have her charger. She sat on the jump seat with a dead phone in her hands and nothing to do but think. And thinking, right now, was not her friend. Diana Walsh appeared at the galley entrance. Her expression was not unkind, but it was not soft either. The captain has been informed, Diana said. The company is aware. When we land, there will be people waiting. Megan looked up. What kind of people? HR, probably legal, probably some others. Diana paused. Megan, is there anything you want to tell me? Anything about how this started or why you... Anything you want on record from you directly before we land? Megan was quiet for a moment. I got a complaint, she said, from 16B. The guy said the kid had been kicking his seat. Was he? A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. I don't know. I didn't personally observe it. And the kneeling? Another pause. Explanation you give me right now. You're going to have to give it to a lot of other people in a much more formal setting. I need you to understand that. Megan looked at her dead phone. Okay, she said, small and flat and drained of everything. Diana turned to go. Then she stopped. She turned back. He was just a little boy, she said, and then she left. 36 minutes since it began. Clarissa Green was not reading the spreadsheet anymore. She had put it away and was sitting very still with her hands in her lap. And she was thinking about a conversation she'd had 3 years ago with the airline's then incoming CEO, a conversation about diversity initiatives and company culture, and the particular kind of change that required more than a press release and a logo update in June. She had pushed for concrete metrics, measurable outcomes. She had been told, very diplomatically, that the company was committed to progress and would be moving forward with a comprehensive review. She thought about that comprehensive review now. She thought about Marcus Williams on his knees. She opened her laptop and began drafting a document that was not a spreadsheet and was not a financial analysis. It was a list of conditions, 8 of them, numbered clearly, formatted simply, the kind of document that could be read in 4 minutes by a CEO who was about to have the worst afternoon of his professional career. At the top, she wrote 3 words, "Before I unfreeze." She saved the document. She closed the laptop. She looked out her window at the country passing below her, invisible beneath clouds, going about the business of Tuesday, not yet knowing what was coming toward it at 560 miles per hour. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Financial Times just called. Wall Street Journal sent 3 emails. Bloomberg is asking for a statement. What do you want me to say? She typed back without hesitating. Nothing yet. Let them wait. 40 minutes since it began. Marcus was still asleep when the man in 16B, the one who had allegedly complained about the kicking, walked past row 14 on his way to the bathroom. His name was Carl Dubrow. He was 53, a sales manager from New Jersey, and he had spent the last 40 minutes trying to decide whether to feel guilty about something or whether he had done anything that warranted guilt. He had said something to the flight attendant when she passed. He had said the kid behind him kept shifting and it was bothering him. He had not asked for anything in particular to happen. He had definitely not asked for anyone to kneel. He told himself this as he walked past the sleeping child. He told himself this as he looked at the mother, who was watching him the way she would have watched anyone right now, with eyes that had already measured the distance between every person in this cabin and her son. He kept walking. He did not say anything. He would spend a very long time in the weeks that followed, thinking about the moment he kept walking and didn't say anything. 43 minutes since it began. And then Robert Ashford, the retired corporate lawyer from Arizona who had spoken up first, stood up from his seat and walked to row 14 and crouched in the aisle so that he was at eye level with Michelle. He didn't wait for an invitation, and he didn't apologize for approaching. "Ms. Williams," he said quietly, "my name is Robert Ashford. I'm a retired attorney. Civil litigation primarily, but I know enough about what happened here to know that you have grounds for a complaint that goes well beyond the airline's internal process." Michelle looked at him. "I'd like to give you my card," he said. "You don't have to do anything with it, but I want you to have it so that when you land and things start moving fast, you have a name and a number that isn't connected to the people who did this." Michelle looked at the card he held out. She looked at his face. She looked at her sleeping son. She took the card. "Thank you," she said. Robert nodded and went back to his seat. Michelle held the card in her hand and stared at it for a long moment. Then she slid it into the pocket of the seat back in front of her, next to the safety card and the in-flight magazine, and she put her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She was not going to sleep. But she needed a moment of not seeing anything, of just listening to the engines and feeling the weight of her son against her shoulder and letting the plan that was forming in her mind finish forming. She was not going to let this be nothing. She was going to land in Los Angeles. She was going to wake her son gently and walk him off this plane with his head high. And then she was going to burn this down so completely that no other mother on any other flight would ever have to hold her child afterward and wonder what to say. 47 minutes since it began. And in the front of the aircraft, in the seat that everyone would later point to in every article and every broadcast as the place where the turn happened, Clarissa Green finished her list of 8 conditions, printed a copy on the airline's onboard printer by requesting it through the flight attendant call system, and asked the attendant who brought it to her if she could deliver a sealed envelope to the senior flight attendant for relay to the captain. The attendant, a young man named Felipe, who had seen everything that had happened and had his own opinions about it, took the envelope without a word. He walked it to the front. He knocked on the cockpit door. And the flight had 1 hour and 3 minutes left until landing. Captain James Okafor read Clarissa Green's letter twice, the first time quickly, the way a pilot reads any unexpected document that arrives in the cockpit, scanning for the operational core of it, the thing that requires immediate action. The second time slowly, because what he had read the first time required a second reading to believe. She had not written it like a threat. That was the thing that struck him. A woman who had just frozen $15 billion in airline assets had written 8 conditions in the tone of someone submitting a reasonable proposal for a committee meeting. Calm, numbered, specific. And attached to every condition was a deadline. And every deadline was tied to a single phrase that appeared at the top of the page and again at the bottom, bracketing the entire document like a warning on a medication. Before I unfreeze. Okafor set the letter on the console beside him and looked at the horizon through the cockpit glass. His co-pilot, a man named Steve Merritt, who had been flying with him for 4 years, was watching him with the kind of careful peripheral attention that long professional partnerships produce. How bad? Steve asked. Clarissa Green is in 5A, Okafor said. Steve turned fully. The Clarissa Green? Yes. And? Okafor picked up the letter and handed it over. Steve read it. His expression, which had started at concerned, moved through several stages before settling at something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. She froze the operating accounts, Steve said, and the capital reserves. While we're in the air. Yes. Steve handed the letter back. What do we do? Okafor folded the letter, placed it in the inside pocket of his uniform jacket, and looked straight ahead at the cloud line. We fly the plane, he said. We get these people on the ground, and then we let the people who are paid to make decisions make them. He reached for the intercom to Diana Walsh. 51 minutes since it began. Sandra Pelletier had converted the airline's Manhattan conference room into something that looked, to the 2 interns who had been tasked with bringing in additional chairs, like a situation room from a political thriller. 3 large monitors were running simultaneously. One tracking the social media numbers in real time, one displaying a live news feed that had already picked up the story on 2 cable channels, and one showing the flight tracker for Flight 2247, a small blue icon moving with agonizing slowness across the digital map of America. The CEO sat at the head of the table with his hands folded and his face composed in the specific way of executives who have trained themselves to project calm in rooms where calm is the least honest response available. Where are we on Clarissa? He asked. She's not taking calls, Sandra said. Her assistant says she's in flight and unavailable, which we know is not entirely true since she's been communicating through her CFO for the last hour. Then get me Daniel Park. I've tried. He's referring everything to their legal team. Hayward unfolded his hands, refolded them. And the accounts? The airline's CFO, a small, precise woman named Joanne Trask, spoke from the far end of the table. The freeze is on operating funds, capital reserves, and the discretionary line. We can cover the next 72 hours from secondary accounts, but if this extends beyond that, we have payroll issues. We have fuel contract issues. We have... She paused. It's a very carefully targeted freeze, Richard. She knew exactly what to touch. Of course she did, Hayward said. It was not an admiring statement, but it was not entirely not admiring either. The monitor on the left refreshed. The hashtag Justice for Marcus had crossed 8 million impressions. 56 minutes since it began. Marcus woke up gradually, the way 10-year-olds wake from deep sleep, surfacing slowly through layers of unawareness until he was simply present again, blinking at the back of the seat in front of him with the momentarily peaceful expression of someone who has not yet remembered what day it is or what it contains. Then he remembered. Michelle watched it happen on his face. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, and that made it worse. Just a small change around his eyes, a shift from the openness of sleep to something more guarded, more deliberate. He sat up straight. He looked at his tablet, which had gone dark. He looked out the window. "How long was I asleep?" he asked. "About 40 minutes, Michelle said." He nodded. He pressed the button to wake his tablet. He stared at the screen for a moment, and then he said, without looking at her, "Are you going to tell Dad?" Michelle was quiet for a beat. She and Marcus's father had been divorced for 3 years. They were civil in the careful, deliberate way that divorced parents with shared children are civil, which meant they communicated regularly and agreed on most things involving Marcus and did not discuss anything else if they could help it. She thought about calling Jerome and what that call would sound like. "Yes," she said, "when we land." Marcus nodded again. He seemed to be processing something. She gave him the space for it. "Mom," he said. "Yeah, baby. She did that because of what I look like, didn't she?" It was not a question. It had the grammar of a question, but the weight of something already known, something he was asking her to confirm rather than explain. And Michelle felt the thing she always felt in these moments, the grief of the explanation, the grief of being the one who had to deliver it, the grief of the world that made it necessary. "I think," she said carefully, "that there are a lot of reasons why people do things. And sometimes those reasons say more about them than they do about the person they're doing it to." He thought about this. "But yeah," he said, "it was because of what I look like." "Yeah," she said, "I think so." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's messed up." "Yeah," Michelle said, "it really is." He picked up his tablet. He pressed play on the Mars rover documentary, and Michelle looked at her son, sitting straight in his seat, shoulders back, watching his documentary, doing the thing she had raised him to do, which was to keep going. And she loved him so hard it felt like a physical thing, like pressure against the inside of her chest. 1 hour and 2 minutes since it began. Back in the Manhattan conference room, one of the monitors changed. A major cable news network had just cut into its regular programming. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Viral video. Flight attendant orders black child to kneel on commercial flight." And then below that, in the smaller text that networks use when they want to acknowledge they don't have all the information yet, "Airline yet to respond." Richard Hayward looked at that chyron for a long time. "Sandra," he said. "Working on a statement," she said. She had been working on it for 40 minutes. She had 17 drafts. None of them were right. The problem with crisis statements is that they need to accomplish 2 things simultaneously. They need to sound human, and they need to protect the company. And those 2 goals are often pulling in directly opposite directions. The statement she needed right now had a 3rd requirement, which was that it needed to somehow address the frozen accounts without acknowledging that a major investor had taken unilateral action to freeze them. Because acknowledging that would confirm that the airline's operations were under external financial pressure, which would send the markets into a spiral before the opening bell tomorrow. She had 17 drafts, and none of them covered all 3 requirements without sacrificing one. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Until the plane lands? About 50 minutes, Kevin said from the door. "Then we have 50 minutes, Sandra said. 1 hour and 7 minutes since it began. The woman in seat 16B was not Carl Dubrow. That's important because in all of the subsequent coverage and conversation, people assumed the passenger who had complained was male. In fact, 16V had changed twice due to a gate reassignment, and the person sitting there for the flight was a woman named Patricia Voss, 48, who had been listening to a podcast and had said nothing to any flight attendant at any point during the flight and had no idea why her seat number kept appearing in the conversations happening around her. When a young woman 2 rows behind her leaned forward and said, "Excuse me, were you the one who complained about the kid?" Patricia Voss took out one earbud and said, "I'm sorry?" "Someone in 16B complained. Was that you?" Patricia Voss looked at the young woman. She looked around her. She processed the last several minutes of ambient cabin tension that she had been insulated from by her podcast. "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," she said. The young woman sat back. Something was wrong with the complaint narrative. 3 rows ahead, Robert Ashford, who had overheard this exchange with the professionally tuned ear of a man who had spent 30 years listening for the thing that didn't fit, sat very still and thought about what that meant. 1 hour and 12 minutes since it began. The twist arrived not on the plane, but in the Manhattan newsroom of a digital outlet that had been running the story for the past 40 minutes. A reporter named James Whitfield, 29, sharp and fast and constitutionally incapable of leaving a thread unpulled, had been making calls since the video first landed on his feed. He had called the airline's public affairs office and received a holding statement. He had called 3 aviation law experts and gotten 3 different calibrations of liability. And then he had called a source he had inside the airline's employee relations department, a source he had cultivated over 2 years for reasons entirely unrelated to this story. And what his source told him made him stop typing and sit back in his chair and look at the ceiling for approximately 4 seconds before he started typing again, faster than before. Megan Carter had a file. Not a large file. Not a file full of formal disciplinary actions or sustained complaints, but a file that contained 3 separate informal notations from the past 2 years, each one describing a passenger complaint that had been reviewed and closed without action, and each one describing an incident involving a black passenger, and each one closed with the notation, "Flight attendant reports misunderstanding. Passenger satisfied with explanation. File closed." 3 incidents. Same notation, same flight attendant, 2 years. James Whitfield looked at his screen. He looked at the number next to the hashtag, which was now approaching 14 million. He looked at the draft of his article, which had been about 1 flight attendant and 1 child. He put his fingers on the keyboard. He changed the headline. 1 hour and 16 minutes since it began. Diana Walsh was in the forward galley when Felipe, the young attendant who had carried Clarissa's envelope to the cockpit, appeared beside her with an expression that told her he had something to say and wasn't sure whether he should say it. "What?" she said. "I don't know if this matters," Felipe said, "but I talked to the guy in 15F. He's been in that section the whole flight. He said he never heard the kid kick anything. And the kid in front of 16B? He said he saw Megan stop at that row before the incident, before anyone made a complaint, like she was looking for something." Diana went still. "He said she stopped and looked at the kid," Felipe continued, "and then she went to the back, and then she came back with the complaint." Diana stared at him. "Did you write that down?" "I put it in my phone." "Keep it," Diana said. "Don't delete it, don't share it, just keep it." She put her hand briefly on his arm. "Thank you," Felipe nodded and went back to the cabin. Diana stood alone in the galley with this new information and what it meant. And what it meant was bad. Not bad in the way that an overreaction or a misreading is bad. Bad in a different way. The kind of bad that doesn't resolve with an apology and a policy review. The kind of bad that has a name and a history, and a file with 3 previous incidents in it, all of which she did not yet know about, but which, in some bone-deep professional instinct, she already suspected existed. She picked up the intercom. "Captain," she said, "we need to talk again." 1 hour and 21 minutes since it began. Michelle had started writing. She didn't have internet, she didn't have a signal, she had the notes application on her phone, and she had her memory, and she had been a charge nurse for 11 years, which meant she had been trained to document everything, immediately and completely and without editorializing, because the documentation was the record, and the record was the only thing that couldn't be taken away from you later. She wrote down the time. She wrote down every word she remembered Megan Carter saying. She wrote down the exact phrase, "Kneel, right here," because that was the phrase she was never going to forget, the phrase that had landed in her body like something physical. She wrote down the names she had seen, Megan, Diana, the name tag of the young attendant who had brought them water after. She wrote down what Robert Ashford had said and where he had been sitting. She wrote down the number of phones she had counted, recording. She wrote for 11 minutes without stopping. Then she read it back. Then she added 2 things she had forgotten and read it again. She saved the file with the date and the flight number and the words "incident report" in the title. She put the phone in her bag. She looked at Marcus, who was watching his documentary with the focused attention of a child who has decided to be somewhere else in his mind. And she thought, I am going to need a lawyer. I am going to need someone who knows what happens next. I am going to need to call Jerome the minute these wheels touch down. And I am going to need to hold all of this together long enough to walk off this plane without crying in front of my son. She was very good at holding things together. She had been doing it her entire life. 1 hour and 28 minutes since it began. Clarissa Green's phone had been buzzing continuously for the past 30 minutes, in a pattern that would have been impossible to ignore, except that Clarissa had, in fact, decided to ignore it. Every media outlet, 3 board members from different companies with which she held affiliations, her attorney, her publicist, her sister, twice. She read each notification as it appeared and did not respond to any of them because she was not ready to respond. And Clarissa Green had learned decades ago that the most powerful position in any negotiation was the position of someone who was not yet speaking. She was waiting. She was waiting for the airline to make the first move, because the first move would tell her everything she needed to know about whether what came next would be simple or complicated. Her CFO had told her the airline's legal team had made contact. She had told him to route them to her attorney and say nothing else. She had not yet received a call directly from the CEO, which meant he was still deciding how to approach her, which meant he understood that the approach mattered. Good. She wanted him to understand that. 1 hour and 33 minutes since it began. The article went live at 12:47 Eastern Time. The headline read, Exclusive. 3 previous complaints against flight attendant in viral video, all involving black passengers. All closed without action. James Whitfield had written it in 22 minutes, which was not his fastest, but which contained some of his most careful sourcing. He had 2 sources on the file. He had the incident numbers. He had the notation language, quoted accurately enough to be verifiable, and not so specifically that it revealed his source. He had a statement from the airline, the holding statement, which he ran at the bottom next to the phrase, did not respond to specific questions about previous complaints. Within 8 minutes of going live, the article had been shared 40,000 times. Within 12 minutes, it was cited on 2 cable news broadcasts. The hashtag Justice for Marcus was joined by a second one. This one, shorter and sharper, and with the specific energy of a public that has moved from outrage to something colder and more determined. Fire Megan Carter. 1 hour and 38 minutes since it began. In the rear galley, Megan Carter did not know about the article. She did not know about the file. She sat with her dead phone in her hands and the specific, suspended quality of someone waiting for something they cannot stop or predict. The galley curtain opened. It was Diana. Megan looked up. Diana sat across from her on the small folding seat and looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. And in that silence, in the shape of Diana's expression, which was not angry and was not sympathetic and was not anything Megan had expected, Megan understood that something had changed, something beyond what she already knew about. Is there anything about the passenger in 16B that you want to tell me? Diana said. Megan's hands tightened on her phone. There was a complaint, she said, but her voice had lost something, the certainty that had been in it before, the defensive confidence of someone who had a story and was sticking to it. It was thinner now, like paper held up to light. From who? Diana asked. The passenger in... I spoke to the passenger in 16B, Diana said. She's a 48-year-old woman from Tampa who has been listening to a podcast for the entire flight and doesn't know what we're talking about. She paused. And I have a witness who says you stopped at row 14 before you received any complaint, before you went to the back, before anyone flagged you. The galley was very quiet. Megan, Diana said, and her voice was the voice of someone who is not asking anymore, who has moved past asking. Why did you stop at row 14? Megan Carter looked at her hands. She did not answer. And Diana Walsh sat there looking at this woman she had worked beside for 11 years, looking at the silence that was filling the space where an answer should have been. And she felt something shift inside her that was not going to shift back. "When we land," Diana said, standing up, "you will not exit through the main cabin. You'll go out the rear service door, and someone from HR will meet you. Do you understand?" "Yes," Megan said. Diana left. Megan sat alone. She had no answer to the question Diana had asked, or rather, she had an answer. She had known the answer the moment she stopped at row 14 and looked at a 10-year-old child and felt something move through her that she had never fully examined and never fully named, and had for most of her life managed to keep below the surface where it didn't have to be looked at directly. She sat with it now. In the rear galley of a pressurized tube 5 miles above the earth, with 38 minutes left until landing. She sat with a thing she had never named. It was not comfortable. 1 hour and 44 minutes since it began. "Mom?" Marcus had taken his headphones off. He was looking at her with an expression she didn't immediately recognize, because it was not the expression of a child seeking reassurance. It was the expression of someone who had been thinking, carefully and privately, and had arrived somewhere. "Yeah?" she said. "I want to talk to someone," he said, "like when we land. I want to, I don't know, I want to say something." Michelle looked at him. "What do you want to say?" He thought about it. He was not a child who spoke before he was ready. "I want to say that it's not okay," he said, "what she did. I want to say that out loud where people can hear it. Because if nobody says it, then it's like it didn't happen. And it happened." Michelle was quiet for a moment. "It happened," she confirmed. "So I want to say something." He looked at her. "Can I?" "Yes," Michelle said, and she meant it completely and without qualification, and without the protective instinct to soften it or redirect it or make it smaller so it would be safer for him. Because he was right. Because the best thing she could do for her son right now was to look at him and say, "Yes, you absolutely can." He nodded. He put his headphones back in. Michelle pressed her lips together and looked straight ahead. She was so proud of him, she could barely breathe. 1 hour and 50 minutes since it began. The pilot's voice came over the intercom with the calm professionalism that flight crews deploy regardless of what is happening at altitude or on the ground. The voice of someone whose job is to be the steadiest thing in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into the Los Angeles area. Current local time is approximately 11:45 Pacific. We'll ask you to begin returning tray tables and seat backs to the upright position. Flight time to landing is approximately 35 minutes. On behalf of Captain Okafor and the entire crew, thank you for flying with us today." The cabin shifted. The collective adjustment of people returning from wherever their minds had gone over the past 4 hours, pulling back into the present, into the approach, into the business of landing. Beverly straightened in her seat and checked her phone. The video she had posted was sitting at 620,000 views. She read that number twice. She had never in her life posted anything that had been seen by more than 200 people, and most of those were family. She looked at the back of Marcus's seat. 620,000 people had seen what happened to him. She hoped, with the specific and earnest hope of a 72-year-old woman who still believed in the basic decency of things, that it mattered, that it changed something, that somewhere in those 620,000 people was enough combined will to make it impossible for this to simply dissolve and disappear the way things dissolved and disappeared. She closed her eyes. She prayed. 1 hour and 55 minutes since it began. Richard Hayward made the call himself. He did not route it through Sandra or legal or communications. He picked up his personal cell phone and dialed the satellite number for Clarissa Green's seat on Flight 2247 and listened to it ring 4 times before she picked up. "Richard," she said. Just his name. The way you say a name when you have been expecting the call and are not surprised by it. "Clarissa." He had prepared for this call. He had notes in front of him, bullet points in the handwriting he used when he wanted to seem less formal. He looked at them, and then he didn't use them. "I've read your conditions." "Good," she said. "I want to talk about them." "We're talking," she said. He breathed. Some of them are operationally complex. The training timeline is 6 months, Clarissa said. I didn't pull that number out of the air. I pulled it from your own internal HR documentation, which I have access to as an advisory board member, and which tells me that a full staff diversity and conduct retraining cycle takes between 5 and 7 months. I gave you 6. That's the middle of your own range. Hayward was quiet. Richard, Clarissa said, I'm not trying to destroy this company. I want to be very clear about that. I have 15 billion reasons to want this company to succeed, but I am also not going to sit in seat 5A and watch a child get put on his knees and then land at LAX and act like I didn't. He could hear the cabin around her, the distant sound of the announcement ending, the adjustment sounds of descent. The employee, he started, is the beginning, Clarissa said, not the end. Her conduct is the visible part. What produced her conduct is the part that needs your attention. That's what my conditions address. That's why I wrote 8 of them, and not 1. Another silence. If I commit to conditions 3 through 8, Hayward said, will you? All 8, Clarissa said, or the accounts stay frozen and I speak to the Financial Times at 6 o'clock. He pressed his fingers against his temple. All 8, he said. In writing, she said, before we deplane. He closed his eyes. I'll have legal draft it. You have 28 minutes, she said. She hung up. Clarissa Green set her satellite phone down on her tray table and looked out her window at the city of Los Angeles beginning to emerge below the cloud line, the vast grid of it, the sprawl and the light and the 10 million lives proceeding below her in all their ordinary complexity. She thought about Marcus Williams, asleep against his mother's shoulder. She picked up her regular phone and typed a message to Daniel Park. Stand by. I think we're almost there. 26 minutes to landing. Part 4. 26 minutes to landing, and the legal team was already typing. Richard Hayward had sent a single text to his general counsel, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had been with the company for 14 years, and who, upon receiving the message, said something under her breath that her assistant chose not to repeat. And the message contained 3 words and a deadline. 8 conditions, 25 minutes. Patricia Holt pulled up Clarissa Green's document on her screen, read it once without stopping, and then looked at her associate and said, clear everything. Everything. Right now. She began to type. In the conference room, Sandra Pelletier had stopped working on the statement, not because she had finished it, but because the statement was no longer the most urgent thing. The most urgent thing was the press that had gathered outside the airline's LAX terminal in the past 40 minutes. 7 cameras that she could count from the live stream her assistant was monitoring. Reporters with microphones. A crowd of people who had come not because they happened to be at the airport, but because they had seen the video and had come on purpose, specifically to be there when Flight 2247 landed, which it was scheduled to do in 23 minutes. She watched the live stream and felt the situation rearranging itself around her in real time. This was no longer an internal HR matter with a media component. This was an arrival. A public arrival, with an audience, and Michelle and Marcus Williams walking into it with no idea it was waiting for them. Sandra picked up her phone and dialed the LAX operations manager. I need a private exit for 2 passengers on Flight 2247, she said. Family of 2, woman and a child. I need them off before the main cabin deplanes. The operations manager was quiet for a beat. That's not standard. I know it's not standard, Sandra said. Can you do it or not? I can do it, he said, but if those passengers don't consent, they won't be asked in advance, Sandra said. Another beat, longer this time. Ms. Pelletier, if those passengers want to exit through the main terminal, we cannot legally. I understand, Sandra said. Do what you can do. She hung up. She stared at the live stream for a moment, the cameras, the crowd, the signs. She could now read some of them from the stream. Justice for Marcus. We see you. One of them is enough. She looked at one sign held by a woman who appeared to be in her 70s, handwritten in thick black marker that read simply, His name is Marcus, and he is 10 years old. Sandra Peltier had been in corporate communications for 16 years. She had helped draft statements for situations that kept her awake for months. She was not, by her own accounting, a sentimental woman. But she looked at that sign, and she sat with it for a moment before she looked away. 20 minutes to landing. Marcus had taken his headphones off again. This time, he didn't put them back. He sat with them around his neck and looked at the city below the plane window with the particular attention of someone who is trying to hold on to something ordinary while the rest of the world does what it's going to do. "Is that it?" he asked. "Is that L.A.?" "That's L.A.," Michelle said. He pressed his nose toward the glass. "It's huge." "It is." "Are we still going to the beach?" Michelle looked at him. The question landed on her with its full weight. A 10-year-old child on this particular flight, after this particular morning, asking whether they were still going to the beach. Whether the world was still going to give him the thing that had been promised. She felt the love and the heartbreak of it simultaneously. Those two things that lived so close together in the body of a mother that sometimes you couldn't find the seam between them. "Yeah, baby," she said. "We're still going to the beach." He smiled, small and real and entirely his own. "Good," he said. He looked back at the window. 17 minutes to landing. The man in seat 16B, Carl Dubrow, who was not the original occupant of that seat, who had said something to a flight attendant about a child who was shifting in his seat, and who had spent the last hour and a half becoming increasingly aware of what that something had contributed to, stood up when the seatbelt sign was still on and walked forward 2 rows. The flight attendant in the forward galley, a young woman named Priya, who had been witness to more of this flight than she had signed up for, stepped toward him. "Sir, the seatbelt sign." "I know," he said. "I just need 1 minute. 1 minute, please." Priya looked at him. She looked at the seat he was walking toward. She made a decision. 30 seconds, she said. He stopped beside row 14. Michelle looked up at him, and her expression was not warm, but it was not closed either. She was a woman who had trained herself to hear things before she responded to them. And she waited. "I'm the one who said something," Carl Dubrow said. He kept his voice low. He did not crouch or sit. He stood, which somehow felt more honest. "I told the flight attendant the kid was moving around. I didn't think she was going to..." He stopped. He looked at Marcus, who was looking at him with an expression of calm and direct assessment that was frankly more composed than his own. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something when it was happening. I should have stood up. I didn't, and I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "Okay," Marcus said. Carl Dubrow nodded once. He went back to his seat. He buckled his seatbelt and looked at his hands for the remainder of the flight and did not look up. Priya watched the whole exchange from the galley entrance. She turned back to her duties without a word. But something in her expression, in the set of her jaw, had shifted. 14 minutes to landing. The legal document arrived in Clarissa Green's email at 12:59 Pacific Time, 11 minutes before the wheels touched the runway. Patricia Holt had worked with the speed of someone whose career had just been reduced to a single deliverable, and the document she sent was 8 pages of dense contractual language wrapped around 8 promises. Clarissa opened it on her phone. She read slowly, which was not her nature, but which was, in this particular moment, necessary. She found what she was looking for in conditions 3 and 5. The language was softer than what she had written. Condition 3, which in her document had read, mandatory bias and conduct retraining for all client-facing staff within 6 months, independently audited, now read, a comprehensive review of training protocols to be initiated within 6 months, results to be internally assessed. She highlighted it. Condition 5, which had required an independent ombudsman appointed by a third party to handle discrimination complaints, now read, an expanded internal review process for passenger complaints. She put her phone down. She picked it up again. She typed 1 sentence to Patricia Holt's email. Conditions 3 and 5 are unacceptable as written. You have 9 minutes. She sent it. She looked out the window. The city was very close now. The geometric precision of runways, the clustered infrastructure of an airport, the whole civilizational apparatus of arrival. She was going to land in 9 minutes. In 9 minutes, the doors of this aircraft would open, and the world outside was going to enter, with all of its cameras, and its noise, and its hunger for the next moment of the story. She needed this done before that happened. 8 minutes. Patricia Holt read the email and said something again that her associate chose not to repeat. She pulled up conditions 3 and 5. She typed new language. She sent it back. 7 minutes. Clarissa read it. Condition 3 now read, mandatory bias and conduct retraining for all client-facing staff to be completed within 6 months and independently audited by a mutually agreed third-party firm. Results to be made publicly available. Condition 5. An independent ombudsman, appointed through a process jointly agreed by airline leadership and advisory board, empowered to receive, investigate, and escalate passenger discrimination complaints without internal interference. She read it twice. 6 minutes. She typed, accepted. Release the document to Daniel Park. He'll countersign as my authorized representative. Do not unfreeze the accounts until his signature is received. She sent it. She closed her email. She looked at the runway coming up fast below the plane and felt something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, and was closer to the feeling of having held something heavy for a very long time and finally, carefully, setting it down. The wheels hit the tarmac. 2 hours and 7 minutes since it began. The sound that went through the cabin when the plane landed was not the usual sound of landing. The usual sound of landing is a collective exhale, the loosening of shared tension that comes from having been airborne and now being safely not. This was different. We're here, he said. We're here, she said. He took her hand without being asked. 2 hours and 9 minutes since it began. The plane taxied to the gate. Okafor kept the seatbelt sign on longer than usual, 90 seconds longer, which is a very long time in a parked aircraft. And in those 90 seconds, a very specific set of things were set in motion. Diana Walsh moved through the cabin to row 14. And I want you to know, independently of anything the airline says to you officially, that I am sorry. I am sorry that I didn't see it coming, and I'm sorry I didn't stop it faster. And I'm sorry that your son, she glanced at Marcus. I'm sorry, Marcus. Marcus looked at her for a moment. He had his backpack on his lap, the space patches facing out. Did you know she was going to do it, he asked. Diana shook her head. No, I didn't. Okay, Marcus said. He thought about it. Then it's not really your fault, but you should have stopped it faster. Diana Walsh, 19 years in commercial aviation, sitting in the aisle of her aircraft, looking at a 10-year-old boy who had just given her more grace than she had given herself in the last 2 hours, pressed her lips together and nodded. You're right, she said. I should have. The seatbelt sign went off. 2 hours and 11 minutes since it began. The rest were outside in the arrivals area, and the crowd that had gathered around them was now somewhere between 60 and 80 people, a number that had been growing steadily for the past half hour as word spread through social media about the landing time and the gate number, information that had been posted publicly in ways that the airline's operations team was still trying to understand how anyone had found. Beverly was standing by the gate door before it opened, which she had managed by moving quickly and decisively during the taxi, the way women of a certain age who have decided something move, without apology and without explanation. She had her phone in her hand. She was not planning to film. She had filmed enough. She was planning to be there. To be a body in the doorway that Marcus and Michelle would walk past so they would see a face that was familiar and kind in whatever was waiting for them on the other side. Robert Ashford was directly behind her. He had his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other. Clarissa Green exited in the first group, carrying her laptop bag and her phone, and the particular energy of someone who has just completed something significant and has not yet decided how to feel about it. She stopped at the gate agent's desk and gave her name and said, I need someone from the airline's executive team to meet me at baggage claim 4 in 15 minutes. The gate agent looked at her. Yes, ma'am. Can I ask who should I? They'll know who it's for, Clarissa said, and kept walking. Back in the cabin, Michelle stood up. She put the strap of her bag over her shoulder. She looked at Marcus, who was already standing, backpack on, space patches out. "Ready?" she said. He looked up at her. "Mom," he said, "are there going to be people out there?" She had been preparing for this question. She'd been preparing for it since she started writing in her notes app, since Robert Ashford handed her his card, since she understood that what had happened in this cabin was not going to stay in this cabin. "Probably," she said. "I don't know how many." He thought about this. "Because of the video?" She nodded. He adjusted his backpack straps. He rolled his shoulders back. He looked. She was standing just inside the gate door, and she saw Marcus come through with his backpack and his space patches and his shoulders back, and she put her hand over her heart without thinking about it, the way the body sometimes moves before the mind catches up. Marcus saw her, and his face changed. Not dramatically, just softened slightly, the way faces soften when they see someone safe. "Hi," he said. "Hi, sweetheart," Beverly said. She looked at Michelle. Words passed between them in the way that words sometimes pass between women without being spoken. Michelle nodded once. Beverly stepped aside. The terminal corridor opened in front of them, and Michelle Williams looked at what was waiting and stopped walking for exactly 1 second. Just one. And then she put her hand on her son's shoulder, not gripping, not holding back, just present, and walked forward. 2 hours and 19 minutes since it began. The reporters converged with the specific, trained efficiency of people who have been waiting for a moment and have been professional about the waiting, but are no longer waiting. "Ms. Williams, can you tell us what happened on the flight?" "Marcus, do you have anything to say?" "Are you planning to take legal action?" Michelle's hand was on Marcus's shoulder, and he was walking at her pace, steady, not flinching, looking at the cameras with the same composed assessment he had been using all day. She had not planned what to say. She had not prepared a statement or rehearsed a response. She was a charge nurse who documented things accurately and spoke when she was ready and not before. And she was ready now. She stopped. The cameras crowded forward. "My name is Michelle Williams," she said. Her voice was clear and even, and carried the quality of a voice that has decided it is done being careful. "My son's name is Marcus. He is 10 years old. We were on a flight to Los Angeles for a vacation that he has been looking forward to for 8 months. A flight attendant grabbed him by the shoulder and forced him to kneel in the aisle of that plane for no reason that has ever been adequately explained to me. There were witnesses. There was video. And I want every person watching this to know this is not a story about one flight attendant. This is a story about what Black children in this country are taught to expect from the world before they are old enough to understand why." She stopped. She looked at the cameras. She looked at Marcus. "My son has something he wants to say," she said. Marcus stepped forward. There was a moment, a very brief moment, maybe 2 seconds, in which the entire crowd went completely quiet. The reporters, the cameras, the 60 or 80 people who had come to be there, a 10-year-old boy in a rocket ship hoodie with space patches on his backpack, standing in front of a bank of cameras in the arrivals terminal of LAX. And the world went quiet for him. He looked at the cameras and he said, "I didn't do anything wrong, and I wasn't afraid. And if this happened to me, it's happened to other kids, and those kids deserve to know that people see them." He paused. He had thought about what he wanted to say on the plane, and he had figured it out, and he said it the way he had figured it out, directly, without performance. That's all. He stepped back. Something moved through the crowd that was not applause and was not silence, but was somewhere between them, a kind of collective physical response, a held breath released, the sound of people feeling something they hadn't planned to feel. Beverly, who had followed them off the plane and was standing at the edge of the crowd, pressed her hand over her heart again and said nothing. 2 hours and 23 minutes since it began. Richard Hayward was watching it live on the monitor in the conference room. He watched Marcus Williams speak. He watched the crowd. He watched his own airline's name crawl across the bottom of the news feed in a sentence that he was going to be living with for a very long time. He turned to Sandra. "Draft me a statement," he said. "Not a corporate statement, a statement from me, in the first person. No legal language, No passive voice. No, we regret that this experience. I want it to sound like a human being wrote it, because they meant it. Can you do that? Sandra looked at him for a moment. She had been in communications for 16 years, and she had heard this request many times, and it was almost never followed through on, because the lawyers always got to it before it went out, and the lawyers had their own requirements. She looked at him with the weighing look of someone deciding whether this time was going to be different. I can draft it, she said. Legal can't touch it before it goes out. That's the condition. He held her gaze. Agreed. She opened her laptop. 2 hours and 26 minutes since it began. At baggage claim 4, Clarissa Green was standing with her carry-on at her feet and her phone in her hand when a man in a suit appeared and introduced himself as the airline's head of operations for LAX. He was breathing slightly faster than normal. Ms. Green, he said, I'm authorized to speak on behalf of... I spoke to Richard 20 minutes ago, Clarissa said. The conditions are signed. The accounts will be released when my CFO confirms receipt of the countersigned document. She looked at him. What I need from you specifically is confirmation that the employee in question has been suspended pending investigation, and that no one on this airline's ground team is going to approach Marcus Williams or his mother in this terminal without their attorney present. He blinked. Yes, the suspension is in effect, as of 40 minutes ago. And the attorney? He pulled out his phone. He made a call. It lasted 40 seconds. The airline's team will not approach the family without prior consent, he said. Their attorney, Clarissa corrected. Not consent, their attorney. He nodded. Good, she said. She picked up her bag. Tell Richard I'll be in touch next week. We have 8 conditions to start implementing, and I intend to be involved in all of them. She walked toward the exit. He stood at baggage claim 4 and watched her go, and thought about the kind of person who freezes $15 billion from an airplane seat and then walks through an airport like someone who has simply had a productive morning. 2 hours and 31 minutes since it began. Robert Ashford found Michelle and Marcus in a quieter section of the terminal, away from the cameras, where they had retreated with Diana Walsh, who had come off the plane and positioned herself as a buffer, with an instinct that was less professional obligation than simple human decency. Robert came to them with his phone out, the contact information for David Kim already displayed. David Kim, he said, handing Michelle the phone, civil rights attorney, Los Angeles. He knows the basics. He's ready to take your call right now, or tomorrow, or whenever you're ready. There's no obligation. Michelle took the phone. She looked at the name and number. Is he good? She asked. He's the best I know, Robert said, and I know most of them. She handed the phone back and entered the number into her own. Thank you, she said. She looked at him with the direct and careful look of someone who is storing faces for future reference. I mean that. I know you do, he said. He left. Marcus watched him go. Who was that? He asked. Someone who did the right thing, Michelle said. Marcus thought about this. There were some of those on the plane, he said. She looked at him. Beverly, he said, and the guy across the aisle who spoke up, and the flight lady who came and said sorry. He paused. Not everyone was bad. Michelle put her arm around him. No, she said. Not everyone was. 2 hours and 35 minutes since it began. Jerome Williams, Marcus's father, landed at LAX on a flight from JFK at 1:47 Pacific time. He had booked it at 11:30 that morning, 40 minutes after his sister texted him a link to Tyler's video and a message that read only, Jerome, call me now. He had watched the video on his phone at the gate. He had watched it 3 times. He had sat in his seat for the first half of the flight without speaking to anyone, and the woman next to him had eventually said quietly, Are you all right? And he had said, just as quietly, I will be. He found them in the terminal. He saw Marcus first. Marcus saw him, and his face did something that it hadn't done all day. It broke open slightly, just around the eyes, the specific look of a child who has been holding it together for adults and has now seen someone in whose presence the holding together is not required. He crossed the distance between them at a walk that was very close to a run, and Jerome Williams caught his son and held him and stood there in the terminal of LAX with his eyes closed and his hands spread wide across his son's back. Michelle watched them, And finally, for the first time since that morning in the kitchen when Marcus had hugged her over the boarding passes, she let her eyes fill. She didn't let it go further than that. She blinked it back. She stood up straight. Jerome looked at her over Marcus's shoulder. His eyes were wet. He nodded at her, and she nodded back, and between them passed the wordless communication of two people who, whatever else had happened between them, had always been aligned in the one thing that mattered most. 2 hours and 40 minutes since it began. The airline's formal statement went out at 2:15 Pacific time. Sandra Pelletier had written it in 22 minutes, and Richard Hayward had read it once and signed off without changes, which was the first time in her 16 years that had happened. It read, in part, that the airline took full responsibility for the conduct of its employee, that the employee had been suspended pending investigation, and that this investigation would be conducted with the involvement of an independent third party, that the airline was reaching out directly to the Williams family to offer a formal apology and to discuss the path forward, and that this incident had prompted an immediate review of the airline's training and conduct standards, the results of which would be made publicly available. The statement did not use the word unfortunately. It did not use the phrase if anyone was offended. It did not use passive voice. Sandra read it one more time after it went out. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she closed her laptop. The communications director of a major airline, after 16 years of corporate language and strategic framing and the delicate art of saying things that were technically true without being fully honest, had just sent out a statement that was simply what it was. She didn't know if it was enough. She suspected it wasn't entirely. There was a difference between a statement and an action, between a promise and a change. And only time and the 8 conditions and the independent ombudsman and the retraining programs and everything that came after would determine which side of that difference this airline ended up on. But it was a start, and it was honest. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that was where things actually began. 2 hours and 44 minutes since it began. Marcus Williams, his backpack on, his parents flanking him, his hand in his mother's and his father's arm across his shoulders, walked through the arrivals terminal and into the California afternoon. He had never seen a palm tree up close. There was one outside the terminal exit. He stopped and looked at it for a full 10 seconds, his head tipped back, his eyes going all the way up. "It's bigger than I thought," he said. Jerome laughed, short and surprised, the laugh of a man who needed to laugh at something simple and had just been given the opportunity. "Most things are," he said. Marcus looked at the palm tree for another moment. Then he looked at his parents, and he picked up the handle of the rolling suitcase his mother had put beside him. "Can we go to the beach today?" he asked. Michelle and Jerome looked at each other. "Yeah," Jerome said. "Yeah, we can do that." They walked. The cameras were still running. The hashtag was still climbing. Somewhere in a Manhattan conference room, the implications were still being calculated. Somewhere in a rear galley of an aircraft now parked at LAX, a woman named Megan Carter was being walked off a plane she would never work again. Somewhere in a downtown office, David Kim was reviewing notes he'd taken on a phone call, preparing for the conversation that was going to determine what accountability actually looked like in practice. All of that was real, and all of it was coming. But right now, in this moment, a 10-year-old boy was walking toward a rental car with space patches on his backpack and a palm tree behind him and both of his parents beside him. And the California sun was doing what California sun does, which is to fall on everyone equally and without judgment. And Marcus Williams tipped his face up toward it and walked. The beach was 40 minutes from the airport, and Marcus slept for 35 of them. He was out before they cleared the rental car lot, his head against the window, his backpack wedged between his knees, the space patches pressing into the glass. Jerome drove. Michelle sat in the passenger seat and looked at the road, and neither of them spoke for a long time, which was its own kind of conversation. The conversation of two people who had been through something together, at a distance, and were now in the same physical space and were finding that distance smaller than they had thought. He spoke to the cameras, Jerome said finally. Not a question. He had seen it on his phone on the flight. He asked to, Michelle said. Jerome nodded. He kept his eyes on the road. You should have seen his face when I walked in, he said. His voice changed on the last word, thickened slightly, and he cleared his throat and didn't finish the sentence because he didn't need to. I saw it, Michelle said. They rode the last 10 minutes in silence, and it was not uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two parents, sitting with the full weight of the day, letting it settle where it would. Not yet ready to begin processing what it meant for tomorrow and the day after, and all the days that were going to be shaped by what had happened on that plane. 3 hours and 20 minutes since it began. Marcus woke up when Jerome pulled into the beach parking lot. He blinked, looked around, looked out the window at the Pacific Ocean for the first time in his life, and was quiet for a long moment. Is that it? He said. That's it, Jerome said. Marcus opened the car door and stood outside it and looked at the water. The Pacific in late afternoon had that particular quality of California light, flattened and golden and enormous. And Marcus Williams stood at the edge of the parking lot and looked at it the way he had looked at the plane window before takeoff, with total, unguarded concentration. It's bigger than the Atlantic, he said. It is, Michelle said, coming to stand beside him. How do you know, Jerome said from his other side. Because I looked it up, Marcus said simply. Jerome laughed. The same surprised laugh from the terminal. And Michelle smiled. And for one moment, the three of them stood in the parking lot with the ocean in front of them and the day behind them, and the particular, fragile piece of people who have survived something and are still standing. Marcus took his shoes off without being asked. He carried them in one hand and walked toward the water. 3 hours and 26 minutes since it began. While Marcus Williams walked barefoot toward the Pacific Ocean, a woman named Judge Carol Whitmore was in her chambers in New York City reading a filing that David Kim had submitted on behalf of Michelle Williams, approximately 40 minutes after the plane landed. It was a formal notice of intent to pursue civil action against the airline and against Megan Carter individually, and it was accompanied by 9 exhibits, including Beverly's video, Tyler's video, Robert Ashford's signed witness statement, Felipe the flight attendant's phone notes, and Michelle's own incident report, time-stamped and detailed in the clean, precise language of a charge nurse who had documented 11 years of moments that needed to be on record. Judge Whitmore read the filing carefully. She set it down. She looked at the window of her chambers for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and texted her clerk. Flag this for priority processing. Civil rights, public incident, minor involved. She set her phone down. She picked up the filing again. 3 hours and 31 minutes since it began. The twist that nobody saw coming arrived at 4:17 Eastern Time in a recording that was posted to a private community message board by a user with no profile picture and a username that had been active for 3 years. The user posted a 47-second audio clip. In the clip, a voice that was later confirmed by 3 independent audio analysts to belong to Megan Carter could be heard in a phone conversation that appeared to have taken place sometime in the last 12 months. The content of the conversation was unremarkable, except for one exchange that lasted 11 seconds, in which Megan said to whoever she was speaking with, "Those people fly and act like they belong up front. Half of them couldn't afford coach if their employer wasn't paying for it." The response from the other voice was inaudible. Megan laughed. "I treat everyone the same," she said, professionally. The clip was posted with no caption, no context, no attribution. Within 20 minutes, it had been shared 800 times. Within an hour, it was everywhere. James Whitfield at the digital outlet had the clip authenticated and published his third piece on the story by 5:45 Eastern. This one had a different headline than the others. This one read, "Audio surfaces of flight attendant in viral video making racially charged remarks." His editor called him while he was still editing and said, "This is going to be the biggest story we've run in 3 years." James said, "I know." His editor said, "Are you sure about the authentication?" James said, 3 analysts, all independent, all confirmed. His editor said, "Run it." He ran it. 3 hours and 52 minutes since it began. David Kim called Michelle at 4:30 Pacific time. She was sitting on a beach towel, watching Marcus and Jerome at the waterline, her son trying to convince his father to walk into the waves, while Jerome negotiated the terms of how far in was acceptable. She answered on the second ring. "The audio clip," David said. "Have you seen it?" "Not yet," she said. "What audio clip?" He told her. She was quiet for a moment. On the beach in front of her, Marcus ran at a wave and then ran back from it, laughing. "Does this change anything?" she asked. "It changes the strength of our case significantly," David said. "It establishes a pattern of expressed bias, not just a single incident. It's not a smoking gun legally, but it's close to one." "And Megan?" Michelle asked. "I've been told she retained an attorney this afternoon, and the airline's position, based on the statement they issued and the conditions they've agreed to with Clarissa Green, is that they are not going to provide her a defense. She's on her own." Michelle processed this. "What do we do?" she said. "Right now," David said, "nothing. You're on the beach with your son. You've already done the hard parts today. Let me do mine." She looked at the water. "Okay," she said. "One more thing," David said. "There are 3 other families who have reached out to my office in the last 2 hours. Former passengers on this airline with complaints about Megan Carter. 2 of them have documentation. 1 of them has a video." The silence on Michelle's end lasted a full 4 seconds. "I didn't know," she said. "You couldn't have," David said. "But you're the reason they're coming forward. That matters." She ended the call and sat for a moment with her phone in her lap, looking at her son at the waterline. Marcus had waded in up to his knees. Jerome was standing dry on the sand, objecting. "It's cold," Jerome called out. "It's the Pacific Ocean, Dad," Marcus called back. "It's supposed to be cold." Michelle put her phone in her bag. She got up and walked to the water. 4 hours and 8 minutes since it began. In Atlanta, Beverly's granddaughter had spent the afternoon fielding media requests on Beverly's behalf, because Beverly herself, upon landing at Hartsfield-Jackson, had turned her phone to silent and taken a taxi home and made herself a cup of tea and sat in her living room with the television off. She was not avoiding the story. She'd been part of the story for 6 hours, and she understood that the story was not going anywhere, and she would engage with it tomorrow when she had rested and thought carefully about what she wanted to say. But she sat in her living room and drank her tea and thought about Marcus Williams at the waterline of the Pacific Ocean, which she had not seen, but which she could imagine clearly enough. She thought about the video she had posted and the 600,000 people who had seen it, which had become, by the time she landed, over 4 million. She thought about what 4 million people seeing something could do and what it couldn't do, and where the line was between visibility and change. She had been 72 years old for 6 months. She had been Black her entire life. She knew, with the specific knowledge of someone who had lived through decades of cycles of outrage and forgetting, that visibility was not the same as justice, that a hashtag was not the same as a policy, that a viral video was not the same as the world being different. But she also knew that none of those things were possible without the first step, without someone seeing and saying something and refusing to let it pass. She picked up her phone. She typed a message to her granddaughter. "Tell them I'll do one interview, whoever you think is right. And tell them that when they ask me what I want people to take from this, the answer is simple. Don't look away. That's all. Just don't look away." She put the phone down and finished her tea. 4 hours and 21 minutes since it began. The hearing before Judge Carol Whitmore was scheduled for 30 days out, but the real process began the next morning when the airline's legal team and David Kim's team sat down in a conference room and began the preliminary conversation about what resolution might look like. It was not a pleasant conversation. It was not designed to be. But it was a conversation. And it was happening. And it was happening because a 10-year-old boy had stood in front of cameras at an airport and said, clearly and without performance, that it was not okay and that other kids deserved to know that people saw them. Michelle was not in that meeting. She was at a hotel 2 miles from the beach, helping Marcus FaceTime his grandmother in the Bronx, who had spent the day praying and checking her phone every 6 minutes, and who, when Marcus's face appeared on her screen, burst into tears and said, "Baby, baby, I see you. I see you." Marcus said, "I'm okay, Grandma. We went to the beach." She laughed through her tears. "You went to the beach?" "Yeah," he said. "It was cold." "California cold," his grandmother said, wiping her eyes. "That's what Dad said," Marcus said. "But it's still cold." His grandmother laughed again, the full laugh of someone who has been afraid all day and has now been given permission to stop being afraid. "Tell me about the water," she said. And Marcus Williams, 10 years old, in a hotel room in Los Angeles, sat cross-legged on the bed and told his grandmother about the Pacific Ocean in the specific and careful detail of a child who had been waiting his whole life to see it and had found that the real thing was bigger than any picture. 4 hours and 47 minutes since it began, Megan Carter was home by 6 o'clock that evening. Her attorney had advised her not to make any public statements, not to post anything, not to respond to any media inquiries, and above all, not to listen to the audio clip that was now being played on cable news hourly with her name attached to it. She had not taken all of that advice. She had listened to the clip. She had listened to it in her car, in the parking garage of her apartment building, and she had sat with it in a way that was not comfortable and was not quick. She had told herself for a very long time that she was not someone who carried bias. She had told herself she treated everyone professionally, which she had believed because professionalism was the category she lived in, and the category she now understood had been a way of not looking at what was beneath it. You could be professional in your manner and still carry something underneath the manner that came out in the way you chose who to stop at and who to pass by, and whose complaint you took seriously and whose you investigated before anyone had actually complained at all. She sat in the parking garage for a long time. She did not excuse herself. She did not find a reason that made the video not what it was or the audio not what it was. She sat with what they were. She thought about Marcus Williams going to his knees in the aisle and the look on his face when he stood back up. And she felt something that was not the defensive sensation of someone trying to protect their position. It was something older and less comfortable than that. The sensation of a person who has seen clearly, possibly for the first time in a long time, and cannot unsee it. It was not a resolution. It was a beginning. And beginnings, she was learning, were sometimes the most painful part. 5 hours and 12 minutes since it began. The airline's stock opened the next morning down 4.5%. Financial reporters had been predicting worse, and the relative moderation of the drop was attributed in several analyses to the speed and directness of the airline's statement, to the announcement of the 8 conditions and the independent oversight component, and to the visible involvement of Clarissa Green, whose presence in the situation was read by the market as a signal that the crisis had capable hands around it. Clarissa read those analyses in her home office at 7 in the morning and felt the particular irritation of someone who understands that markets are not the same as morality, and that a 4.5% correction was not the point. The point was not the stock price. The point was never the stock price. The stock price was a pressure tool, and she had used it as a pressure tool. And now the pressure had produced commitments, and the commitments needed to be honored. And that was where the actual work began. Not in the board meetings, and not in the press releases, and not in the quarterly reports, but in the daily decisions made by ordinary people in uniforms doing ordinary jobs, in who they stopped beside, and who they passed by, and what they told themselves about why. She opened her calendar. She had a meeting scheduled for the following week with the airline's leadership team. She moved it forward by 3 days. Then she opened a new document and began writing notes for what she wanted to cover. She had 8 conditions on paper. She was building a 9th in her mind, one that she hadn't put in the letter because it wasn't something you could enforce by contract. It was something you could only advocate for and model and repeat until it became the culture rather than the exception. She wrote 2 words at the top of the page: sustained accountability. She underlined them both. 5 hours and 33 minutes since it began. 3 weeks after the flight, Marcus Williams was invited to speak at a community event in Compton, organized by a coalition of parents and educators who had been watching his story and who wanted, in their words, to bring it home. Not home as in the Bronx, where Marcus lived. Home as in the specific, concrete geography of Black families navigating a world that was not always navigating fairly in return. Michelle said yes on Marcus's behalf, and then she sat down with him and asked him what he actually wanted to do. He thought about it for 2 days. He was not a child who made decisions quickly, which was something Michelle had always loved about him. He took things seriously. He turned them over. On the 3rd day, he said, "I'll do it, but I want to talk to kids, not adults. Like, I want to be in a room with kids my age, not cameras and microphones, just kids." Michelle relayed this to the organizers. They adjusted the event. They cleared an afternoon, reserved a school gymnasium in Compton, and invited 140 students between the ages of 8 and 13. Marcus stood in front of them without a microphone. His voice was the size it was, and the room was quiet enough to hear it. He said, "I want to ask you a question first. Has anything ever happened to you that wasn't fair and you wanted to say something, but you didn't know if it would matter?" Silence. Then hands. Slowly at first, then more, then almost every hand in the room. He looked at the hands. "Okay," he said, "here's what I know. It matters, even when it doesn't feel like it matters, even when you say it and nothing happens right away. It matters because saying it is the thing that comes before everything else. Nothing changes before someone says something." He looked at the room. "I said something," he said, "and people heard it. And I'm not saying that because I think I'm special. I'm saying it because you're not less than me. So if I could say it, you can say it. Whatever it is, say it." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a girl in the 3rd row, 8 years old, braids, a shirt that said "Future Scientist," raised her hand and said, "What do you do when you're scared?" Marcus looked at her. "You do it scared," he said. "That's it. There's no trick. You just do it while you're scared." She looked at him for a moment. She nodded, like she was filing it away somewhere inside herself, in the place where children put the things that are true and that they are going to need. 6 weeks after the flight, the formal investigation into Megan Carter's conduct concluded with a finding that supported termination, a finding that also noted, in careful institutional language, that the airline's existing complaint review system had failed on 3 previous occasions to identify a pattern, that the investigation had taken 11 days to confirm. The finding recommended not just individual accountability, but systemic reform, and it named specifically the practice of closing complaints with a single notation review and no follow-up. The airline adopted all 8 recommendations of the investigation, which were separate from but aligned with Clarissa Green's 8 conditions. The overlap was not a coincidence. It was the result of Clarissa having spent 3 weeks in meetings with the investigation team, not directing their findings, but making sure that the conditions she had negotiated had the investigative teeth to back them up. Richard Hayward sat across from her in the final meeting and said, "You knew this would take longer than a press cycle." "Yes," she said. "Most people don't," he said. "Most people aren't paid to think past the press cycle," she said. "I am. And so are you, if you're doing the job right." He looked at her for a moment. "You're going to be a problem for me for a long time, aren't you?" "Only if you stop doing the right thing," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. 8 weeks after the flight. David Kim called Michelle on a Thursday afternoon with news that she had been anticipating and that landed harder than she had anticipated anyway, which is the way that anticipated things often land. The settlement offer from the airline was, by the standards of civil aviation cases, significant. It included a formal written apology signed by the CEO personally that used the words racism and harm and failure without qualification. It included a fund established in Marcus's name, the Marcus Williams Fund for Youth Advocacy in Aviation, seeded with $5 million, the purpose of which was to provide legal support and advocacy resources for passengers who experienced discrimination in air travel. It included first-class travel for Michelle and Marcus for life, which Michelle's first instinct was to refuse, and which David talked her through accepting, because the symbolism of it mattered, and because Marcus had earned the right to sit wherever he wanted on any airplane for the rest of his life. And it included a formal public acknowledgement read into the airline's quarterly earnings call by Richard Hayward himself that what had happened to Marcus Williams on Flight 2247 was not an anomaly and not an isolated incident, and was not the fault of a single employee alone, but was the product of a culture that had failed to examine itself with sufficient honesty, and that the company accepted full responsibility for that failure and was committed to the work of changing it. Michelle sat in David Kim's conference room and read the settlement document twice. Then she looked at David. "Is this enough?" she asked. He met her eyes. "For the law? Yes. For the world?" He paused. "That's not for me to say." She looked back at the document. She thought about Marcus in the school gymnasium in Compton. She thought about the girl with the braids and the future scientist shirt, asking what you do when you're scared. She thought about Marcus's answer, which she had been thinking about ever since she heard it, which had told her something about her son that she already knew, and that still, when it came out of him in that room, had taken her breath away. You do it scared. She signed the document. 4 months after the flight, Marcus Williams went back to school in the Bronx on a Monday morning in February with his space patch backpack and his rocket ship hoodie, which he had washed and kept because he was not the kind of person to throw away a thing because something bad had happened while he was wearing it. He sat at his desk in 5th grade and did his work and ate his lunch and came home on the A train the way he always did. His teacher, a woman named Ms. Porter, who had been following his story from the beginning and who had calibrated her awareness of Marcus carefully to make sure she was neither ignoring what had happened nor making him feel like a specimen, stopped him after class. "How are you doing?" she said, really asking. He thought about it.